Thank you for joining us today. My name is Marcus Weber, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar. I am the Technology and Execution Council Chair in Fluor's Business Transformation and Innovation team. We focus on new and innovative ideas, never losing sight of the critical thinking and analysis that comes from our global team of expert engineers and designers. Our people are at the core of our success. Everyone on the Innovation Builders team and the speakers on this call are remote working parents and grandparents, and we applaud their ability to find time to share their knowledge in addition to serving their clients while juggling the intersection of their career and home lives. Today's technical presentation will be about International Construction Measurement Standards, or otherwise known as ICMS. Fluor has a strong, safety-driven culture. As such, it is customary for us to start our meetings with a brief safety topic. I would like to introduce Vijay Parasaram, a Project Controls Manager in Fluor's Vancouver office. Vijay has over 15 years of experience in mining and metals projects and is an important member of our Project Controls team. Vijay, please unmute your audio to give the safety topic.
Thank you, Marcus. The Cerberus project completed in late 2005 is a 120,000 ton per day copper concentrator in Arequipa, Peru. At the peak of construction, it had approximately 3,500 craft personnel. After a rash of work-related injuries identified at 30% construction progress, a statistical analysis determined that most incidents occurred during mid-morning, and the probable cause was a lack of attention on behalf of the workers. One of the reasons determined for the cause of this lack of attention was the fact that a worker went from roughly 4:30 a.m. to 12 noon without any sustenance aside from water. A snack program was introduced where the site caterer provided a sandwich, piece of fruit, and bottled drink for each worker. The project saw a substantial improvement in safety records after instituting this program. The program cost approximately $1.2 million at 0.1% of the total project cost, proving that a minor investment can result in a safer construction site. Thank you for listening, and I'll turn the presentation back to Marcus.
Thank you, Vijay. Our speaker today is Roy Howes. Roy is a fellow with expertise in estimating. He's a professional quantity surveyor with over 30 years of industry experience. He is Fluor's Global Functional Lead for Estimating, Functional Lead for Estimating in the Mining and Metals Business Group, as well as the Project Controls and Estimating Department Manager of Fluor's Vancouver office. Throughout his professional career, Roy has been involved in construction, infrastructure development, port facilities, industrial projects including oil platforms, and multiple mining projects. Before I turn it over to you, Roy, a couple of housekeeping items. The audio lines for attendees have been muted to eliminate background noise. The session today is being recorded and will be stored in the United States. Please make use of the Question and Answers tab to ask any questions, which should be addressed to all panelists. We invite dialogue and will pause about halfway through and again at the end of the presentation to address any questions that have come through the Q&A panel. We value your time, and the webinar will not extend past the hour allocated. If Roy is not able to answer all questions during the Q&A session, a Q&A summary will be sent to all participants within a few days. With that, Roy, please unmute your line to begin.
Thank you, Marcus. Hello and welcome, everyone. I would like to take you on a journey that started back in October 2015 and will introduce you to ICMS. ICMS' aim was to address the systemic problems facing the construction industry, where projects seem to continually run over budget and take longer to complete. On time and on budget has become the gold standard rather than the standard. Many books have been published to address these systemic problems. Edward Morrow, the founder of Independent Project Analysis, commonly known as IPA, and author of Industrial Megaprojects, suggests that 65% of projects with capital value greater than $1 billion fail to meet their business objective. John K. Holman, in Project Risk Quantification, A Practitioner's Guide to Realistic Cost and Schedule Risk Management, quoted, "In the project world, Significant cost and schedule overruns are the norm. Blowouts are common and rarely predicted, despite applying seemingly sophisticated risk analysis and methods. He goes on to say that in 2014, Ernst & Young performed a study of 205 major oil and gas industry projects and found that the estimated cost at completion was an average forecast to be 59% above the initial estimate. Furthermore, Ernst & Young later reported that the average overrun of initial estimates for mining and metals was 62%. These are recent examples of what 50 years of similar research has found. ICMS perspective on the who, what, when, how, and why of the global construction industry will be shared with you to provide a clearer picture of the challenges facing the construction industry. Construction is everywhere, and it is truly an international phenomenon. Building the Eiffel Tower, the George Washington Bridge, building a dam in China, major projects which were delivered by domestic teams applying domestic standards. All projects are still there doing their job. The standards worked well, and our professions and our professional organizations and associations have played a part in ensuring these standards were and are fit for purpose. But we cannot ignore the seismic changes that our world and our industry have seen since these projects were delivered. Our world is changing. We're becoming more global. Today, the construction and infrastructure sectors are about as international as you can get. Projects are funded and owned by foreign investors, and projects are delivered by international and multidisciplinary teams. This is an image of what the UK government sees the Hinkley Point Power Station to look like when it is delivered. It's a project which is built in the UK, funded by Chinese investors, and owned, operated, and constructed by French company EDF. It's an example of the many dozens of international projects which get delivered today. We have to ask, are our domestic standards relevant and fit for purpose in modern times? No question that they are quality, but just how applicable and consistent are they? The fact is, investors, industry, and business is leading the change, the shift to a globalized sector. But professions and professionals must play a vital role in supporting and underpinning this trend if we are to ensure sustainable and robust professional services across the industry. This is a story how collectively we have been working to respond to this challenge since 2015. It's a special story about collaboration, perseverance, and shared values. It's a story which doesn't finish today, but it does reach a symbolic culmination of all the hard work accomplished to date. Standards work. For example, in Canada, standards accounted for 17% improvement in labor productivity and 9% overall economic output over 23 years, resulting in $62 billion to the gross domestic product. In the United Kingdom, 13% in labor productivity improvements contributed annually to £2.5 billion. In the USA, statistics on safety and construction are well documented, and I'm sure standards are available for reference. Infrastructure development occurs when conditions are right. On time, on budget, results in satisfied stakeholders and taxpayers. The World Bank in 2015 encouraged policymakers to build more capacity, to improve regulations and institutions, and the public-private partnership, commonly known as P3, had a balance of interest through risk-sharing mechanisms. The chart on the right indicates that as the project definition improves, it requires input to ensure that the reporting accurately reflects current conditions impacting construction. Growth in cities over the next 40 years, from 1990 to 2030, results on average at 300%. The largest growth occurs in megacities. From the chart, megacities with a population greater than 10 million increased from 10 in 1990 to 41 forecast in 2030. How will the construction industry accommodate this exponential growth? Cost overruns on international projects is astounding. They range from hydroelectric projects, Sydney Opera House, highways and motorways, rail metro, bridges, dams, and tunnels. Canada's firearm registry, although not a construction project, reflects growth when the scope is ill-defined. Not to mention other projects. Although countries have complete cost-related standards and information sources, there appears to be many more countries where the quality of published guidance and cost information falls short of what local professionals might wish. For example, the Building Cost Information Service, or commonly known as BCIS, is not internationally known or applied. The International Monetary Fund, the IMF, raised this concern where the cost of a project, take for example a bridge, in Budapest, Hungary, cannot be compared to a similar project in Canada. This is primarily due to the cost reporting being substantially different. A major source of inconsistency in international comparisons is the variety of definitions used, what is included and what is excluded from the national measures of construction activity. Consistent approaches are required, and how variables are measured and presented. This needs to take account of data requirements of statisticians, policymakers, international bodies, industry, researchers, and others. It's an international issue and needs to be addressed at an international level. Construction is too important a sector of the economy to be measured so poorly. Over-budget infrastructure projects across the world force governments out of power, and taxpayers are left to foot the bill. The Boston Big Dig, shown in the graph, indicates a $13.4 million overrun, or 670% on the initial cost. This overrun is even reported to be greater. This leads us to the next slide, which shows disputes in construction projects. The average length and cost of construction projects, disputes by region over 5 years, results in ranges greater than 6 months and less than 18 months in duration, at a cost of $9 million to up to $113 million. These disputes can be avoided or at least diminished with international standards. So why are construction costs so important? What is included or excluded in construction costs of a project is vital to understand how it compares, to assess the value for money, benchmarking, and reporting purposes. Different approaches to presenting costs of construction produce results that vary between 25% and 30% due to inconsistencies. For example, a project is stretched to its limits to obtain board approval where the project is not to exceed $1 billion. The project has been benchmarked against similar projects. The project team promises the board fiduciary responsibility during execution, only to experience legitimate claims during construction, caused by ground conditions inadequately investigated, permitting, hidden costs, etc. These extras incur $300 million overrun, not to mention other external impacts such as market conditions, escalation, and currency fluctuations. So what happened? Comparative data for consistency and reassurance was unreliable. Insufficient knowledge and experience collating the estimate prior to board approval. The project focused on other aspects of the project without paying attention to project execution. So construction standards used today, they differ within countries. The project location impacts elements such as labor and materials, fabrication and installation, freight costs, etc., land acquisition, the purchase of property, professional fees, support during construction is often underestimated, and client costs. The corporate costs are covered by the project and sometimes not. The implications of global inconsistency, unable to accurately compare these projects, investment risk is compromised, lack of transparency, which leads to underinvestment in construction, time and cost overruns. In Germany, political parties are held accountable to deliver mega projects such as a rail and other infrastructure projects on time and on budget. Failing this achievement will result in them losing power. So welcome to ICMS. ICMS is a global consistency in presenting construction cost. If you follow the website, you can download the first and second edition. In addition, there's a template to help you start the data collection process. The ICMS Standard Settings Committee, comprising 27 independent experts from over 17 countries, was appointed by the ICMS Coalition to draft the first and second edition. Currently, we have Alan Muse as our chairman, Malcolm Horner vice chair, and Anil Sawhney as the executive secretary. Today, we are 46 and growing. All the major professionals and standard setting bodies in the sector from all around the world, including Canada, for example, the Canadian Institute of Quantity Surveyors, in the UK, Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, in the US, AACE International, as well as the European Commission for France, Germany, Japan, Hong Kong are also signed up, Australia, the Australian Institute of Quantity Surveyors, as well as China and Brazil. The list goes on. So who will benefit from ICMS? At a project level, financial institutions, investors, clients, consultants, contractors, and the supply chain. At a national level, governments, regulatory and standard setting bodies, and national professional institutions. At an international level, global financial institutions, investors, clients, consultants, NGOs, and global professional institutions. Who will use ICMS? Many coalition organizers have signed the declaration and committed to the implementation of ICMS. Practitioners have incorporated ICMS within existing standards and guidance. Governments, NGOs, and business currently lead the adoption of ICMS in the marketplace. Funding agencies and institutions will require all future requirements to be assessed based on ICMS. Technology vendors, for example, the BIM, Building Information Management System, and other software have incorporated ICMS. ICMS partner organizations will lead market adoption. What are the aims of ICMS? Construction costs to be consistently and transparently benchmarked. The causes of difference in costs between projects can be identified. Properly informed decisions on the design and location of construction projects to be made. Data to be used with confidence for project financing and investment, program and decision making, and related purposes. So how will it be used? Cost reporting and data collection will be incorporated as part of the exercise for project execution. Investment and risk analysis will be determined, benchmarking global costs, and should costs, which is an innovation and new technology, has made should costs a technique attractive to estimating exercises to determine a fair and reasonable price today. For example, if there's an overland conveyor and you compare it to a suspended conveyor, such as the Doppelmayr-Rupkon, the exercise may require reverse engineering to establish a should-cost solution. Procurement evaluations, auditing, and dispute resolution. How can I get involved? Professional and standard-setting bodies are encouraged to join the coalition and to adopt ICMS. Private firms, universities, and governments are invited and also encouraged to become voluntary partners and work with the coalition to develop, raise awareness of, and implement ICMS. Marcus, I think it's a good time to pause and address any questions we may have from the audience.
Thanks, Roy. Yes, we do have several questions from the audience here. First, how does Fluor propose to adopt the ICMS?
Applying ICMS as an overlay on our projects, we have a Fluor Historical Data Center where we can provide cost data in a format that will be recognized by the international institutions, for example, the IMF and World Bank. This will ensure clarity in interpretation as the reporting will be consistent.
Great, Roy, thanks. We have one more question. Are the common principles of international standards such as CII, FIDIC, or other similar standards not found adequate in controlling the cost and schedule of these respective projects?
They are, and ICMS, as I mentioned later, is not in conflict with any of the standards that are currently in the industry. What ICMS provides is an overlay, a framework in which to report on the various costing structures. CII, for example, would have a detailed, and we'll show later that it's at level 4. However, it does need to provide some consistency at an international level so that we can compare it against other standards that are established in Europe and Asia.
Thanks, Roy. Why don't we pause the questions for now? We will reserve time at the end of the webinar to address additional questions. For the webinar participants, please keep typing in your questions in the Q&A panel, and again, address them to all panelists. Again, we will leave ample time at the end of the webinar to address those. Roy, I'll turn it back over to you to continue the presentation.
Thanks, Marcus. So the guiding principles, ICMS is collaborative and equal. It's owned by all, and the standards are developed by independent experts. As I mentioned in the question session, it's a high-level framework, and there's no conflict with existing standards, as well as being implementable. So the evolution of ICMS Coalition and the Standards Setting Committee, as I mentioned, the coalition was formed on the 17th of June 2015 at a formal meeting at the International Monetary Fund in Washington, D.C. With bold ambition and huge enthusiasm from the start, we created a global consistency in project cost reporting. Working collaboratively to focus on the greater good, there were signed declarations in the room. It was very symbolic, and it was right from the start. We discussed an agreed governance structure, and from the coalition that was formed, a steering committee was struck comprising 27 experts from around the world, with private and public consultation reviewing the documents that were issued in draft. If you download the first and second edition from ICMS website, they will look similar to what's on the screen. The ICMS issued the first edition on construction costs in mid-2017, and the second edition, including life cycle costing, was published in September 2019. So describing the framework, it's a hierarchical frame with 4 distinct levels. Level 1 is the project, and if the project has sub-projects, those are incorporated at level 1. At level 2 is cost categories, major cost categories. Level 3 provides cost groups within the cost categories, and level 4 is a cost subgroup. Building and specific civil engineering project categories have been identified. Buildings can be grouped, but however, a road and motorway cannot be compared to a water treatment facility. So this matrix provides some direction on what to be addressed and what coding structure to use. Within the system, attributes and common values allow the system to be fully automated. Project attributes list, for example, the report, the price level, currency conversion, the program, site, and procurement. Within those project attributes, project values such as the project title, the status of the cost report, the location, and country is provided. Pricing levels include currency code, the base date of the costs, and the basis, whether it's fixed or fluctuating. The currency conversions include date and exchange rates. The program or the schedule provides the construction duration with milestone dates. And the site, the topography, ground conditions, access problems, these are all important to filter in identifying similar projects. Procurement, funding, and project delivery are all important project values. Boundaries already established within other standards are recognized for consistency. This graphical representation of a building enables the boundaries to be interpreted without translation. For example, the suspended floors below grade in the basement are categorized as suspended floors. However, the substructure is considered to be anything below grade and determined as a basement, although the grade line on the left is below the finish line of the basement. So the graphic provides direction on how to interpret the cost allocations. A picture is worth 1,000 words. So the interpretation of a substructure and a structure are consistent across all projects. For example, this may be a bridge deck with piling, and the piling is considered the substructure, whereas the piers and the deck are considered the structure, whether it's below or above grade. So the core classification in ICMS. ICMS, as mentioned, is an overlay and does not contradict existing standards. Level 1, 2, and 3 provide international categorizations, and Level 4 may be too detailed for international use. However, local metrics will allow for further granularity and understanding. Mapping detailed classifications to ICMS at Level 3 is mandatory. However, at Level 4, it's discretionary. To go back to the question early on, if CII, or in Fluor, the project work breakdown structure, is too detailed for ICMS, it can be dealt with at a Level 4 categorization. During the development of the first edition, the public consultation highlighted the need for interpretation of life cycle costing. Life cycle costing is the life and duration of the asset. The second edition was published to include life cycle costing throughout the asset's life. An acronym was created, CHROME, to address all the aspects of life cycle costing, where C is construction costs, the R is renewal costs, the O, operational costs, M, maintenance costs, and E, end-of-life costs. ICMS distinguishes between life cycle cost and whole life cost, which takes the acquisition property costs into consideration. The ICMS recognizes this distinction, but construction and life cycle costs were addressed in the second edition. In this figure 1, it illustrates the broader context and scope of the second edition, including what is covered beyond the first edition. So aside from life cycle costing, new categories were introduced, such as dams and reservoirs, mines and quarries, and pavements and motorways. And the list will continue based on public consultation. So as I mentioned, public consultation will continue to augment what has already been produced. The steering committee believes that carbon capture measurement and impact on global warming and greenhouse gas emissions are important metrics to address that are already influencing our industry. So with that, I will thank you for this opportunity to introduce ICMS to you, and I'll hand you back to the moderator for questions, comments, and discussions. This was an accelerated overview of ICMS, and I'm happy to provide some response to some of your questions.
Roy, we do have a couple questions from the webinar participants. I'll just start into them here. Is there a way to compare a project's construction costs with other similar projects, and does ICMS collect this data, and if so, is it available to everyone?
ICMS is a standard. It provides the definition and the structure on how to collate the costs. ICMS does not provide information on construction costs. That is information that is provided or developed within the company, and the company owns that data. So it's very important to develop the structure in accordance with ICMS standards and develop the confidential or the data that's relevant to your projects within your organization.
Thanks, Roy. Here, I'll continue on with the questions. What are the benefits of using ICMS from an owner's point of view?
That's a very good question. If I take mining, for example, many owners have projects that were developed probably in some cases later than 10 years. That information is not current. It doesn't reflect market conditions, And what happens is the next project that rolls around, they refer to the data that they have at their disposal. The information is not current, and therefore the results that they produce may be optimistic, leading to difficult decisions when the project is advanced to a pre-feasibility or feasibility level and a consultant presents them with the estimate. What I'd like to see is that ICMS be introduced into client organizations where the data is kept current, it's market related, and we are basically talking about the same costs whether we're talking about a project today or in the future.
Great, Roy. Here, I'll continue with the questions. Will ICMS be mapped to other standards such as Master Format, Informat, or NRM?
As I mentioned earlier on, the ICMS is an overlay. So, for example, the Master Format and the MRM will be at level 4. We're not going to compete with current standards. The intention is to provide an overlay for consistency on comparing projects internationally. There are a lot of projects with a lot of structured detail. At Fluor, we typically use work breakdown structures, which does really get into the details of the project. However, when you compare that project to an international project, you do need to have a level playing field, and ICMS will help you get there.
Great, Roy. If you have additional questions for Roy, please do enter them into the Q&A panel to the right of your screen and address them to all panelists. Roy, we have a couple more questions. How do you allocate site supporting costs in ICMS? As an example, a hospital, energy building, roadway, and the site lighting.
So that's a good question. Site supporting costs are associated with the project, will be incorporated, and there is an allocation for utilities and various other aspects of the hospital or the project that you are collating data. If the project is deemed major, in other words, the power to the hospital is an important component, it involves power generation, then it would be considered a sub-project of the main project, the hospital, and it would be captured as a project or a sub-project within the overall structure.
Thank you, Roy. One more question. Will ICMS provide any certification to projects?
ICMS is a standard. We are hoping that everybody will adopt it and it will be a consistent measure. We will not be enforcing it. It will be a standard that hopefully with common use, it will eventually become an attractive comparison. So the actual enforcement is not part of the objective. We are trying to establish a standard that everybody can use with confidence.
Thanks, Roy. Next question. On several of the previous slides, you went over kind of the industry going over on construction costs and mentioning the gold standard. What should clients expect as a typical cost overrun, and with ICMS, what improvement ideally would they see?
So ideally, every project should be on time and on budget. However, research indicates that it's a question that needs to be addressed as small, medium-sized and mega projects, because the overruns on a mega project compared to a small project are substantial. So I would say that if you were to categorize the project into small, medium and large, your average for cost overruns should be less than 5%. For your schedule overruns, you should be looking at somewhere in the range of 3%. So I would say that the constraints, tolerable constraints on projects is fairly tight. And as I mentioned in our earlier slides, you can see some substantial cost overruns. And there are multiple reasons for the cost overruns. So I think that boards of companies are less tolerant of cost overruns because the responses or the reasons for the overrun are not clearly understood or well defined.
Thanks, Roy. Another question. Are I'll say endorsements or using the ideas behind ICMS or the actual use of ICMS becoming requirements on bigger projects, perhaps more international projects?
ICMS is encouraged. At the moment, it's a standard that we hopefully adopt. I'll give you a brief example. As a test, I asked some of the professionals in the Vancouver region. I asked them for a cost. What is the cost per square meter for townhouses in the Lower Mainland? The response came back quite impressive. Actually, the response came back with virtually the same dollars per square meter. However, there was no qualification to say that these dollars per square meter are in compliance with a standard. That's where ICMS can certainly help. In the future, it would be very valuable to international institutions such as the IMF and the World Bank if a company can say, this is the cost of our project that we're requesting funding, and this is the metrics in ICMS compliance. It would make everybody understand where the costs lie and how they're reported.
Great, thanks, Roy. Here, continuing on with questions. What is a strategy to promote the usage of ICMS as a standard? Is there any intention to establish local chapters or something similar?
That's a very good question. At this moment, it's an international coalition, and it's for the greater good. If there is a particular region that feels that they would like to advance it further, I'm sure that the ICMS Coalition would encourage it. However, at this stage, we as a steering committee are focusing on what the public consultation has provided. So any feedback that we receive will be taken seriously, and we are in the process of incorporating the third edition. So if local chapters is something felt strongly, that would certainly be considered as part of the next publication.
Great, thanks, Roy. Questions continue to come in here. How beneficial will the implementation of ICMS measurement in federal and U.S. government, or other governments for that matter, projects driven by earned value management system?
I think there's a very good correlation. So many of our projects, we have debates about productivity, we have debates about cost overruns, and nobody seems to fully understand where they lie. Are they technical? Are they political? I think it's important for governments to understand what that information represents prior to project shovels in the ground and the project ready, especially with the recent announcement in the US where there is $1 trillion of infrastructure investment planned. If ICMS is introduced, the hope is that all those projects that have been identified and shovel ready will be monitored, and hopefully the reporting will be accurate, and the results will be better than previously expected on projects.
Thanks, Roy. Maybe a good question that just came in to follow up with that one is, with ICMS, is there a risk that projects may not go forward when clients see the possible costs at the project inception stage?
I think that, as I showed on one of the slides, that through the development of the project, you need to provide input. And if the project is looking unfavorable at an early stage, there are opportunities to reduce costs, adjust scope. So I don't believe that a project will be cancelled or not sanctioned as a result of ICMS. I think ICMS will be a tool that can allow you to understand where the costs are prior to construction. So during the engineering phase, if costs, especially international costs, supply chain costs, are showing trends that are exceeding tolerance level for the project, action can be taken to adjust those aspects of the project. So it's an early warning system that can be introduced into the project.
Great, thanks, Roy. Another question, you had mentioned in one of the earlier responses that the data is typically saved by individual companies and not available as, say, a global database. Any advice that you have to perhaps make that information a little bit more widespread?
Well, every organization, if you look at the professional body of RICS, CIQS, the professionals are fully versed in ICMS, and they can provide a cost coding category for a client's projects. In other words, get the wheels on the ground, get the process moving. The important thing to remember is that this information, especially in some of these mega projects, is confidential. I don't think many clients would like to know that their project is being referenced as an outlier or not a gold standard. So it is sensitive data, and it should be retained within the organization. However, if it's ICMS compliant, then at least you are measuring your project against other projects within your institution on an equal basis.
Thanks, Roy. You had shown on the previous slides that ICMS has categories for specific types of projects. Are there any that ICMS doesn't work for, or perhaps ICMS is working to develop?
Yes, we are. We are continually growing. As I mentioned, dams, mining and quarries was introduced in second edition. We are focusing on other aspects of the industry where especially public consultation has given us direction. So that process is actually underway. And currently we are focusing on marine type projects so that we can start developing a standard for a marine type of institution, whether it be dredging, either a shipload installation, etc. So the list continues, and it's really based on the feedback we get from the public.
Great, thanks, Roy. I'll remind the webinar participants again to ask or to propose any questions to Roy in the Q&A tab or panel to the right of your screen, and again address them to all panelists. Another question that's just coming in here, Roy, is ICMS developing a master man-hour productivity level as well?
At this stage, it's an overlay, so the man-hours would be at a level 4 or below. However, there are categories to address the man-hours for the project during construction to identify productivity, etc. So from an overlay point of view, it may not be evident. However, at Fluor, we can provide you with a support to develop your projects in such a way that you can account for the man-hours, either at a ICMS level or more granularity at a level 4 and below.
Thanks, Roy. Another question similar perhaps to the last one is, many projects have seen labor productivity be very different between seemingly similar or very similar projects in different locales. How does ICMS address those local issues while kind of giving this interchange or ability to compare projects on an international stage?
So as I explained in the attributes and the values, you would have a list of locations and the altitude of the project and all other contributing factors that may impact productivity. What happens in the actual automated system is that you can identify similar projects to what you are currently working on, and then those projects should provide some benchmarking or some reflection of what labor and what other aspects will impact your project due to the location of the project. Similarly with unions and non-union type work and self-perform, all those types of impacts on a project can be collated and listed in your database so that you have that information to remind you of the implications of developing a project on top of a mountain or in a very challenging area where there may be constraints for traffic and access. All those cost data metrics are vitally important to ensure that you have that at your fingertips when you start developing your new project.
Thanks, Roy. Here, more questions coming in. Will implementation of an ICMS database require training for project personnel or other organizations utilizing that information?
So the publication is self-explanatory and it does provide you with a framework. However, if it is still not clear, there are professional consultants I'm readily available to support, The ICMS group are happy to provide a response to any concerns or queries that you may have if you have difficulty in understanding how to collate the data. Most of the professionals in the construction industry would be able to compile the report simply by following the instructions in the edition. But as I stressed early on, is there are people to support should you hit a roadblock.
Thanks, Roy. A couple more questions coming in. Has IPA indicated whether it anticipates requiring cost data in ICMS format from its clients?
Not that I'm aware of. As I mentioned, IPA and some other consultants such as AACE, they have very granular requirements for reporting. So there is no contradiction or conflict between what ICMS is producing and what IPA and AACE and various other bodies are producing. The information is simply the same, however, it is collected in different categories so that you are able to compare on a apples for apples basis. I'll give you an example that occurs quite regularly in mining. A primary crusher is a piece of equipment that you need at the initial phases of any particular concentrator. However, if you ask any professional what is the cost of the primary crusher, you'll get various answers, simply because the battery limits of that primary crusher are not well defined. ICMS will provide you some support in order to say this is part of the concentrator or it's not part of the concentrator, and it's categorized in a consistent manner.
Thanks, Roy. Another question coming in here. Will ICMS encompass projects that will be part of near future energy portfolios, such as hydrogen plants, carbon capture and sequestration, biomass, and others similar to that?
Yes, that is in fact what we're working on right now, is to understand carbon capture and the clean energy and all the other projects associated with carbon capture will be addressed in future editions. It's really a matter of understanding the industry and understanding how the cost should be collated. Carbon capture, I've been involved in a few meetings recently. It's really fascinating how much research has already been undertaken to determine the carbon per cubic meter of concrete, the carbon for steel, and now addressing transportation and various other aspects of that carbon capture will be able to provide a total for carbon for the construction aspects. Obviously, there's another aspect of carbon during the life of the asset, and we're addressing all of these issues with professional and external consultants to ensure that we understand how it works and develop a standard around the industry.
Great, Roy. A question coming in here that's perhaps a little similar, but expanding on the last one. It looks like the audience is appreciative of the benefits of ICMS. However, what should they do if the current template in ICMS does not support the project type that they're interested in?
Short answer is to send a query to the ICMS website, and that question will be addressed. If there is a workaround required, we will certainly address it. We've had 2 public consultations to date, and they've been very responsive, and so we are quite well versed with the types of questions that are raised, and there may be some frequently asked questions which have a quick and ready response. However, if there's an area that is there's a gap, that will be part of future editions that we can address. Currently, we are just focusing on the 80-20 rule, trying to get as many projects that fall under the 80% as possible, and then we will focus on some of the new energy and some of the other projects that have an important role in the industry, but because of their new technology or new initiatives, we will have to research that before it gets incorporated into a future edition.
Thanks, Roy. We have time for a couple more questions. I'll fire them away here. Does AACE support ICMS?
Yes, AACE is part of the coalition. We have 47, I think, members, and AACE RICS, CIQS, the European Commission, Hong Kong QS, Australian Institute of Quantity Surveyors, and so on and so forth, have all signed and are members of the coalition.
Great. Another question, Roy. Will ICMS have online training workshops available for project personnel such as QS in early stages of their career?
That's a very good question, and something that we can certainly look into. The idea of ICMS is to ensure that the standard is used broadly, and if training is a requirement, we can certainly address that. There are professional bodies that can support a young graduate in quantity surveying or in the construction industry to ensure that the framework is clearly understood, so that we start using it in our vocabulary. We start using it as a day-to-day reference point.
Great, Roy. We got a follow-up question to one of the recent ones just answered. I'll just read it out here. You mentioned that the international agencies are on board, RICS as example, and several others. Are the EPCs, Fluor, Bechtel, Wood, etc., getting on board with those as well?
Yes, they are. In the UK, OVARIP has signed up, and Fluor has certainly providing that as a service. For most of the large EPCM companies, we can provide this as a service, especially at Fluor, because of my involvement on the committee. It's one of those standards that we encourage everybody to adopt. So it really is universal, and so far we've had some very positive feedback from the consultancy, as well as organizations that have a engineering department within the organization, such as government institutions.
Great. Thanks, Roy. It looks like that's all the questions that have come in to date. So with that, perhaps it's time to wrap up. Roy, I want to thank you for your presentation. We really appreciate all who attended the webinar today. You have been a very engaging audience, and it's been a pleasure being your moderator.
Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you, Roy. We will be hosting our next webinar on Thursday, September 3rd at 10 a.m. Central Time to discuss advanced process modeling for troubleshooting. In this webinar, Michael Ettinger will talk about his work helping a client troubleshoot quality problems using the transition from a batch to continuous production of kettle chips. Getting the perfect crunch requires understanding of the data, going back to first principles, finding limits, and removing them. Keep in touch with your Fluor contacts, follow our social media postings, or head to the Innovation Builders page at fluor.com to sign up for future webinars. We really appreciate your attention and thank you again for dialing in today. We will send out a compiled list of Q&A within the next few days. Expect to see a webinar recording available on demand mid-next week at fluor.com. If you have any questions or require additional information, please email innovation.builders@fluor.com and someone from our team will get back to you. Have a safe day.